Welcome, everybody. We are here live on YouTube. Today is another episode of the Space Water Podcast, and I am so happy to have our special guest, the one and only Gary Wayne. This is episode 32 of our Space Water Podcast, and Gary is a longtime guest and friend of the show. He's been on my radio shows. He's been on all my podcasts and different platforms over the year, and it's always a pleasure to have Gary here live with us. And today we have a very, very important topic, very interesting topic. And I think a lot of the knowledge we've maybe discussed over the years, but it's more focused today on a specific topic. We're going to be talking about the Nephilim alliances and various customs that arrived from these alliances. And not only these alliances bringing customs, but these alliances were made for world domination, to control and dominate the world and to expand their powers. And these wars over and alliances, they shaped the very culture and that we have today, and this very war is transpiring today. And from at least 3000 BC, we can have proof of a materialistic era that have been dominating the world. And this comes from that ancient Asura Deva war and the Asura domination of these warrior tribes. And we've brought Gary Wayne back on today to discuss these ancient Nephilim alliances and how they are still happening today to control and dominate the world. And some of the things we'll be talking about today are the Mittani as well, and the Egyptian alliances. And these international alliances, they reshaped the Mediterranean and the Near Eastern world. And during the later Bronze Age and ages like that, which is still happening and resulted in what we have today. So, Gary, I can't wait to get into this topic. It's a pleasure to have you guys. Gary Wayne's from Genesis6Conspiracy.com, and he's got two books in the series, so pick it up. Welcome back, Gary.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and so happy to be here. And the topic, anytime we're talking about giants, obviously puts a smile on my face. Not that I like giants, but I like the topic and the importance of the topic. So, yeah, thank you for inviting me back. And I think we're going to talk about a couple of topics that are almost never talked about in the ways that we're going to talk about things today, I think, depending on how the conversation goes. And we're going to frame things in ways that people haven't looked at before. And it's very important to sort of kind of understand that. So I look at, when I sort of look at the table of things and saying there's always a premise and there's always a setting that sort of frames things for the conversation that we may want to have. And so if I look at the book of Enoch and Azazel, who is the leader of the Watchers in the book of Enoch, and he's the one who taught most of the science, the technologies, and the sorceries or magic spells and the things that are going to be part of what we're going to be talking about. He also taught the arts and crafts of war. So he supplied the technology of weapons. He supplied the ability to do martial arts. He supplied the strategy of war and the tactics of war. And he is the sponsor of war. And when we look at the giants, they are perpetual war. And they are within their belief system of polytheism under the dualism, that's sort of the inner dualism versus the macro dualism. And there are, in the Nephilim terms, good Nephilim and evil Nephilim who use either black magic or white magic and worship certain sets of gods versus the other sets of the pantheon of gods, all whom are rivals. And so not only have you have that interaction with humankind where the white hats would have humankind's interest a little bit more at heart, although the agenda and the end goal is the same thing. The black hats would just wipe us from the face of the earth sort of instantaneously. And so between understanding that and that they're all trying to become the dominant dynasty. That's where the rivalries come from. And it's this ancient technology and knowledge that crosses the flood. And begins with sort of where you're placing from a secular chronology, the time after the flood, 2950 to 3050, you said 3000 BC, is the secular timing for the flood.
Yeah,
No matter,
I just threw
yeah,
that as a number because it's sort of around there, I guess,
yeah,
right?
well,
Yeah.
it is. And it begins with groups that are coming down from the mountains in Mesopotamia. And the Mittani and the Kazites and the Indo-Aryans are all part of that. But we have to understand that the Indo-Aryans were the giants, and there's 4 or 5 different groups of those giants, and that they're using the same things that were taught to them and have the same skills as the antediluvian giants. And that's what we see that showed up in the post-diluvian world. So much so, according to the Septuagint, these are the peoples that Nimrod gained his reputation on against the giants as a mighty one. And so, yeah, I think that's just setting the sort of table that war and how they organize for war, which has now become the alliances, both before and after the flood, become a significant part of what shapes that world along with the religion.
Yeah, that's an, I totally agree. So when we talk about the flood, there's also a very interesting correlation that goes along with this. And I wanted to read this one before we get more in depth into it. This is from the Rig Veda, and this talks about Indra releasing the flood to destroy the Dasyus, right? These evil people or evil forces that aligned with demonic powers that he wanted to release. And it says in the Rig Veda 6:26:1, I gave the earth to the Aryans, the rain to the mortal worshippers. I led the roaring floods. The gods moved according to my will. In ecstasy, I destroyed the 99 cities of Shambhara. And then it says, united with you in your friendship, O Soma, Indra made the floods to flow for man. He destroyed the serpent who held the 7 rivers. He opened out their covered channels. United with you, O Soma, he broke off the wheel of the sun. Suddenly, with force, as it revolved through the great mountain, the great evil was removed from all life.
Yeah, very interesting polytheist account of
Yeah,
what happened with the flood, the antediluvian civilization, and really is now just sort of, laying the framework for the post-diluvian um, period. And Indra seems to be a offspring god versus a parent god. So it would be very much equivalent to Baal or
yeah,
Zeus or Osiris. And just as Indra slew, because Indra was alive before the flood as well, but just under in a lower position as an offspring god. But Indra is the one who slays Virta, the
yeah.
Leviathan
And
type
releases the
creature that
waters.
God does, right?
Yeah.
Before the flood. And Baal does the same thing. Marduk does the same thing. It's the same.
So can we look at this, Gary, as like the polyistics throwing their local names for the gods into the monotheistic god's place?
Well, they're replacing God as the rulers of the earth.
Yeah,
They're replacing it with a similar but different sort of hierarchy, right?
yeah,
So, and there's multiple gods that are worshipped versus the distinction in monotheism where El Elyon is the father.
yeah,
Um, and then they create mother goddesses as polytheism does to sort of act as the Holy Spirit. And then you have the offspring,
yeah,
whether or not that is gods or it's giants. And you get into the Messiah aspect, just as, Mus and Musis and Muhus are terms in Sumerian Egypt for the dragon Messiah. And for the one that is in waiting, just as the Prince of Wales would be a similar allegory of the red dragon in an English understanding of the Prince in Waiting. It's all talking about the same things. So yeah, they're all the same gods, just different vernacular names to the same pantheon. Now they may have split from the large pantheon into sub-pantheons around the world with, as they set up larger um, uh, civilization, and that those gods are going to be ruled over, or those nations are going to be ruled over by an individual god with that sort of replacement throne room or lower throne room. But I think there's a central hierarchy of at least seven, maybe 12, depending on what you're looking at, because there tends to be like 12 Olympian gods before the flood and after the flood.
Yeah.
So there may be as many as 12 as they bring it in, but seven is the more common number.
Do you think it's possible that the flood that actually happened wasn't from the God of the universe, the creator of, but it was from a lesser deity, a polytheistic God?
Yeah, it's not clear to me from a biblical perspective in the MO and how the Bible is written. Is it God who brings the flood, or is it God who permits the flood?
Yeah, like
Eh,
it some sort of lesser being
yeah,
that was standing in the place of God and wasn't
yeah,
really the God
yeah.
God.
So in the polytheist accounts, it is the gods in plural, the pantheon of gods who bring the flood. So whether it's Zeus or it's Baal or it's Indra, these are the gods that are bringing the flood, and that it's not the evil God of the Bible that everybody says who brought the flood. And
Yeah.
again, I think you could understand this differently, or they could just be replacing themselves with what God had brought.
It seems
But
simple to talk about, but it's very confusing, you
it
know?
is, yeah. And so I always caution the polytheists, don't be so quick to blame the God of the Bible for the flood. He may, if
Yeah.
anything, his MO is to let things play out through free choice, and he knows what the fallen angels are going to do as well, and that he permits the technology of the giants before the flood get to a level that the fallen angels taught, as in the Azazel account in the Book of Enoch, a technology that only the gods had that could destroy the earth by fire. So if that were to happen, then all the names in the Book of Life would not have an opportunity to have their chance to leave their name in or have it blotted out. So there's an intercession. So then the distinction is now, does God bring the flood, or does he permit the fallen angels and the gods to bring the flood so that the earth isn't destroyed by fire? And in the polytheist accounts, the giants are warring all over the world, and they have to stop the giants because they're going to, sort of destroy the world. But it's an opportunity to destroy everything, including humankind. So the fallen angels don't care about the giants as much as they want to wipe humankind out from that sort of perspective, because they don't want them to be raised up like angels and reach their destiny. And that's why they've created the giants in the first place, to wipe the earth from the face of the earth. So there's this intercession with the flood, because both in polytheism and in monotheism, destruction by fire is reserved for the end time. So just as 2 Peter 3 talks about this, um, and the destruction is all by fire, when you get into Lord Maitreya, which is, by the way, is an Indo-Aryan word out of Sanskrit, which we can also talk about later if you want, but it's a different rabbit trail.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
awesome. I like that.
um, and they, in the age of Aquarius, which we're moving into right now, there's a destruction by fire, and it doesn't have to be at the beginning, as in 2012 when that age started, but because it's like over 2,000 years long. But somewhere in the beginning is the sort of the general understanding. So, yeah, I think that not only did the fallen angels want to bring the destruction by fire, is to ruin God's timetable and to destroy humankind from the face of the earth. But there's that intercession, and so we get a restart after the flood, and everything starts all over again, and the same process building to that point that we're just starting to get to now, is set in motion.
All right. It's very interesting where we could get into, even in these stories of a solar force that they're
Oh,
describing
I
coming
forgot
down.
I
Yeah.
forgot one thing that the gods say in most of the polytheist accounts is
Please
that
do. Please do.
the humankind had to be wiped out because they were too noisy. There were too many making too
Yeah.
much noise, to this, to that. And so they want to get rid of them. So understand that they're not, even in polytheism, you find the case that the gods are not the friends of the humans.
Yeah.
And they tend to choose more to, if there is a survival of the giants, to help giants survive versus humans.
Yeah. That's kind of recounted in one of the Egyptian writings that's on one of the walls. It's actually titled Destruction of Mankind.
Yeah,
And it talks about how the people of Earth started to talk and be noisy and complain
yeah,
against Ra. And he
yeah,
brought the eye of Ra in the form of
yeah,
Sekhmet
yeah,
and
yeah.
of solar force down on
And
Earth.
and it's an oddity. It's in pretty much all of the flood stories. Giants are included as well for reasons for their destruction as becoming evil and not, they lost their righteousness of their original nature, as being demigods, and they blame the human side for corrupting the god side. The demigod is 50-50, even though some epics like Gilgamesh has two-thirds, one-third, but
Oh.
that's it. But that's what they're talking about. And so maybe in their eyes, even the giants had become so corrupted they weren't going to be their preferred people as well. But in most stories, though, they save at least a remnant of the giants. So whether it's Upnapishtim and all of his family, which is two-thirds god, one-third human, whether or not it's Deucalion and Pyrrha. Deucalion is the son of Prometheus. So he's a he's a he's a Greek Nephilim. He's not a Greek human from before the flood. So
I was answering people in the chat room. All right, so we should get into, okay, right after the flood, how these civilizations arise and they're at war with each other and they come from the same origins. They come from the same origins, but some of them fall off of, sort of the spiritual harmony of the group because it says even they gave the earth to the Aryans, right, in the Rig Veda, right?
yeah,
It talks about how they were all at once, united at one time, apparently on the planet, and there was a war between them all, and then these different cultures arise, and they're at war with each other, and then they start to build alliances with each other.
yeah.
So where should we get into here? Some of the first civilizations that arise that we see,
Yeah, so if we understand that,
the Akkad and
yeah, if we understand that the giants are the aboriginals after the flood, in the
yeah,
lands that the humans from the monotheist side, from Babel, will go after Babel to migrate to different areas and then go live amongst these giants in those areas. It starts to give us a better understanding and why you get a sort of an intermix of languages, religions, and peoples, that you always have to be looking for the distinctions. So what I mean by that is that the Scythians are Indo-Aryans and they're the Proto-Greeks. Etruscans are Indo-Aryans, they're the Proto-Italians or Romans. Um,
yeah,
you have in, let's say, Persia, you have Indo-Aryans that moved there first, just as in the Indus Valley, for, the Raja kings of Indo-Aryans there. And it's a splinter branch of the same branch. And why the gods used in both areas have the same names, some transliterations, but the same names. And you have like the Olam, Olamin, biblically. That's uh, who the descendants of Shem, who probably have their name changed to Elam because it's a different word than Olam, but in the same series, but a distinction. And that a lot of researchers like Smith would say that there's two people that merged with the Elamites. And I think that's showing us that sort of distinction as well. And Olam means ancient from the east, and these are Eastern giants and the ancient ones. And so you have all of these peoples that are setting up things before the humans get there. So that's why it gets a little bit confusing once you get that sort of merging. But if we understand that they were of one agenda, one alliance, one
Yeah.
people at the beginning, and they just migrated and separately and then created their own dynasties,
Yeah.
probably they were sent by their gods to certain areas of the earth because the gods rule the earth with through the council
Specific
of the gods.
coordinates,
What,
right?
yeah, whether
Yeah.
it's the assembly at Mount Saphon or Hermon or Nippur, or the Greek hi hierarchy of the god council overseeing the nations. This is a standard. These are the ancient ring lords that is talked about in the Sumerian lore as well. It's common understanding that they have portioned out the earth to themselves, or God has apportioned it out to them from a monotheist perspective, as in Deuteronomy 32, and keeps the land of the covenant for himself.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so these nations, these giants would be sent there. Now you're going to create these sort of primary post-Diluvian dynasties with a religion that's going to morph a little bit as well and become different vernacular names and things, but now they're going to become rivals.
yeah. Well, let's start with like what you brought up with Elam, because I think that's important and one of the first, because they seem to have uh, came into like the Persia area, right? And
Yeah,
they were dominating trade routes and alliances for a
yeah.
while, right? And this was in Central Asia now and India, right? I think right around there they were having these trade routes between there,
Yes, yes.
you
Well,
know?
there was, because they were common peoples with the specific Persian Indo-Aryans that are selling that are in both in Persia and India. You're going to have this interaction. I look at the Olamine as being possibly Persians, but there seems to be a distinction there as well. So you're going to have an intermixing of two different kinds of giants, and but what you are going to see as well is Nimrod is going to stay in that area after Babel. He's going to intermarry with the giants, set up hybrid dynasties. He is third generation after the flood, and his accounting in Sumerian would be Enmerakar. That Eridu has the same story as the Babel story. And so when you start to see more connections to the Elamites, that they're in the same cities as Nimrod is first starting after Babel, and sort of inherits or takes over probably around um, from a biblical chronology 2200 BC to 2250. From the secular one of 2950, that would be about 2850 to 2800. You start to see the Elamites take over control, and then the Akkadians take over control from there, who are also giants as well.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. And I found one guy, David McAlpin of University of London, he had claimed that the ancient Elamite language appears to be related to Dravidian, the language of South India.
Yeah, it's Indo-Aryan.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, right?
It
It comes
is.
and their city was called
Yeah,
Susa,
yeah. And
which
it should be Semitic if it's
yeah,
from the Shemite line, and
yeah,
that's the language that would have dominated, but it didn't.
yeah. And
And
their city
and
Susha is Varuna is related to Varuna's city,
yeah,
Susha.
Susa, which was
Yeah.
an Elamite city, right? And
Yep.
so, and it's very important to understand that that's an Elamite city versus a Sumerian uh, or Persian city of the other giants and dynasties living in that area. So, and so where, King Chedorlaomer of the, who's a vassal, a tax collector of the the Third Dynasty, which is an Elamite or Akkadian dynasty or joint of each as that comes down. He's the one who is the king of an Elamite city. That's part of that alliance.
Wow.
That's going to include the Third Dynasty,
Yeah.
right? And this is the four kings in an alliance that are going to invade the covenant land to deal with other giants. So by the time of the War of Giants in Genesis 14, you have firm alliances already set up. And so whether or not that is you're using biblical chronology or secular chronology, that is going to be within about 350 years after the flood, when those alliances and dynastic uh, bloodlines have already been set sort of in stone and in place throughout the Middle East, and one suspects elsewhere. And when you look at that area around Elam and Ur, you had pretty much a pentapolis of city-states working together.
So you
And
think
that,
these places were originally, or like before the flood, ancient Vedic or Atlantean even colonies that were reestablished?
yes, I do. And I
That's
understand the
incredible.
importance. And I don't think like Nimrod built Uruk or or Erech, as it's understood, Erech. I think he renovated those cities. I think that was very, very
Yeah.
common because they
Wow.
weren't they weren't left submerged underwater like other cities around the earth. And I think they moved in and renovated them. And they founded their new civilizations and sort of inherit the mythos, which is very typical that whoever is ruling is early in the after the flood is inheriting from the gods to the kings to the countries the mythos and the history from before the flood. And they sort of melds into it, which is why you need to separate parent gods from offspring gods so you know who they're worshiping and what that cutoff means. That's the time of the flood when that changes.
Yeah, when they started to use their advanced knowledge and abilities to harness powers to rule as gods
Yeah,
and to for materialism, and this created very dark energies and dark spirits and dark forces on this planet that
yeah,
we're still facing today.
yep,
And not only did they absorb some of the cultures of the locals, but they seem to have created their own individual new things emerge when you take on the population of the locals and merge their customs with it. You have a whole new thing that emerges and whole new tribes that emerge. And when you want to control and dominate people, you have demonic forces that emerge, evil looks. uh you start to distort and and create monsters of nature, abominations of nature,
yep,
and all of this started to happening. And we start having tribes, dedicated to becoming monstrosities of nature and perverting nature. And some bad things started to emerge, Gary. So let's talk about some of these tribes that start to emerge, and some
yep,
of the wars, and tribes that started wars. Like we have,
yep.
I mean, these are. Do you consider the Hyksos and like the Amalekites and these things all one kind of, or are these like kind of like different tribes within tribes? Because I every time I try to say, are they different, or are they
Yeah.
all reunited, or
It's complicated for sure, especially
yeah,
with the different versions that we get. I when I was writing book two, I had to dig sort of really deep into it to try and get some distinctions. So there's overlaps. That's why it gets confusing. So, like the Hyksos is has a greater house and a lower house. And you have the Shamau of the north and the Amau of the south. They're the same peoples, but they're different locations. But they're all connected into the Hyksos, right? Where the
yeah,
original Hyksos takes over the Hyksos dynasty. It's the southern one that first starts using their base of avarice to knock off the Egyptian dynasty, and then it's the greater house of the north that intermixes. So we need to keep in mind, that there's different pockets of people living in different locations. So the Amalekim, they're not only in the Petra area, there's an eastern location for them as well. You've got the Avim not only in Gaza and in Central, but also in the East as well. And they're depicted worshiping Nagal in a city that's in Mesopotamia. So you have Horim that are in the south in Edom, And then you have Horim that's also in Syria and part of the Syrian and Mesopotamian dynasties. And then you also have a branch of the Horim called the Hurrians, which is the uh, Hirim, or Hiri is the patriarch, as the original Hebrew says, and then you've got the Hivim, which is a third branch of that same group that has a Hivi as its patriarch and Hori as the patriarch for the Horim. That's in the central, and but there's pockets of them in that area as well. But there's even more peoples that are kind of intermixing like that. So when we start to look at the Syrian empires, they are very much an alliance of powers and intermixing, and then they're very much akin to the Euphrates ones, just further, a little bit further to the east, and they're all sort of interrelated. So the Mittani, for example, Mittani and Kazites and the Hyksos are probably the best examples of where these peoples sort of come together. So, the Mittani are originally, as they come out of the mountains from the north, are the Mary Anu, and they're Indo-Aryans, or they're intermarrying with another group called the Mary Anu. And they're also going to intermarry with the Hurrians or the Hurim, as I talk about in book 2. And then you're going to have an intermix with the Hittites, which are a Canaanite hybrid offspring. And the Hittites are going to have an Indo-Aryan language, and they're going to look like the Syrian and dark-haired kings and Euphrates kings, and they're going to be intermixed as part of that alliance at certain times as well. And in fact, you have a treaty between the Hittites and the Mittani that's made that has as their witnesses the gods Indra, Varuna, and Mitra, which is Mithra. And
Yeah.
so it's showing that sort of interconnection. And the Hurrians were also part of the Mittani dynasty as well. And the Hurrians intermarried also with the Mary Anu. And there's a people called the Hattites or the Kattites, Khattites, which included a mixture of the Hittites, Kazites, and Mittani, but distinguished them by the spelling a little bit because of all of that sort of intermarriage. But they were all sort of part of it. And so the Mittani dynasty was in the originally along the Euphrates River and the Mary Tablets, where we get records out of that. But also in Syria, they had another branch um, uh, set of dynasties, and they were understood as in the east as Aram Nerahim, which means the Euphrates River. So again, I don't want to get too. I'm already into a lot of minutia here, but I just want to show that when we look at the Euphrates alliance of kings, it's distinct as
Yeah.
an alliance in there, as there's one dominant one that takes over and that changes at times, but it's the same alliance of giants. And then you have a kin Syrian one that overlaps into the Bashan area, because Bashan is understood as the land of giants by Josephus. And that's going to also include in this alliance, at least after, it might be after, but it could have been before, because you don't see of the Makkathim or the Gesherim who are going to be attacked by this four-king alliance coming out of the third dynasty. They're going to hit the Rephaim in the Mount Hermon area. They're going to go down the east side of the Jordan River and take out also the Emim and the Zamzuzim. They're going to go in and hit the Horim and the Amalekim in the southern part in Seir in the Edom area. They're going to hit on the Amorites as well. And then they're going to finish off and recapture the 5 cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, which were being protected by 2 separate alliances of giants in the covenant land. But not all of them were, supporting the hybrids or the Canaanites and the Amorites. And it's the Canaanites from Sodom and Gomorrah and the 5 city Pentapolis that stopped paying the tribute to Chedorlaomer, who is the tax collector of the Ur-the-Third dynasty. He's the enforcer, part of that city alliance. So you don't have the northern tribes of the Covenant land in that war. You don't have the Makkathim and the Geshurim and the land of the giants, except for the Rephaim, which are clearly the first target. So they probably were the strongest. And then they wiped out all the other protectors before they got into the Canaanite and Amorite pentapoles and resubjugated them. So yeah, there's a lot going on there in people. And that's why, a lot of people said you sure have a lot of detail as of all these different peoples and stuff in book two. I'm going, it's important to understand who they are, because if you don't understand who they are out of prehistory, you don't understand their effect coming down into written history. So it's important to sort of make that clear. So you have the Syrian alliance of kings, you have the Euphrates alliance of kings, you have what I call the Eastern Alliance in the Covenant land of giants. You have the Southern Alliance, and the Southern Alliance would have also included later on a separate one that comes in, which is the Philistines with the Cherethim and the Pelathim, the Caphtorim, the Casualhim, with them from Crete, and they expropriate Gaza, and they're going to operate as part of that Southern Alliance, but as a separate confederacy. You have a Central Alliance of giants, and you're going to have a Northern Alliance that is going to be also all alliances, as I named them. You can follow those alliances, and I lay it out in book two in separate campaigns as Joshua is taking on those various alliances. But understand as well that that alliance that is in the Euphrates area, the Third Dynasty, the fallout from the war is you're going to have the rise of the Hyksos and you're going to have the rise of the Amorites. So the Hyksos is going to, eventually take over Egypt, and the Amorites are going to move into the Mount Hermon area, where King Og is now going to move probably from the Ugarit and rule as a Rephaim in the land of the Rephaim, ruling over Amorites as are listed in the Eastern campaign of the time of the Exodus. And then the Amorites are going to take revenge on the Eastern alliance of Euphrates later, not that much later, like within 100 years, depending on the historian, after the War of Giants, and they're going to knock over that dynasty. They're going to set up the Amorite dynasty that the Kassites and the Mittani are going to succeed after that, after the Hittites topple the Babylonian Amorite dynasty. So, but if you didn't know all of that, you wouldn't follow that sort of chain of events, like who succeeds, as you start to get more closer to our history.
Yeah, and when you get to the Matani, they're very enigmatic, and I'm interested in them a lot because they don't have a lot of monumental art,
No,
and they were making conquests and wars and things like that. So they weren't interested in glorifying their conquests. They had more specific interests, right? And they were making interesting alliances, and I wanted to get into that for a minute because they intermarried with Egyptian pharaohs. We know this. We've seen it
yeah,
in the Amarna letters.
yeah,
And I first wanted to see if there were any Mittani princesses that gave birth to Egyptian future pharaohs, if they had any children. So I looked into first. You have
yeah,
uh
and they did.
right, and it might have been because Amenhotep III, he had no children with Mittani queens.
Yep,
I looked it up. Like he just, but his father was Thutmose IV.
yeah,
He might have had a child with a Mittani queen. The Mutemwiya may have been Arta Ama's daughter,
yeah,
which means that Amenhotep III might have been his mother might have been a Mittani princess.
yeah, yeah,
So
and very,
that's
very,
very interesting.
and very, very likely. And
Yeah.
what that and that was happening even before that, and again also after that. So whether it's Akhenaten, he's going to take on Mittani wives as well, because the Mittani were a very powerful empire at that time. And not only were the pharaohs thinking that they were very pure in their bloodline, they would be very selective as to who they would take foreign wives from. So when they take a wife from the Mittani, that means
Yeah.
that is a pure, about as pure as you can get for a strain of giants, because they want that ennobling to raise their pedigree.
Yeah, well, wasn't it during like Thutmose the Fourth? Like they had like 9 or 10 rejections before they finally
Yeah,
accepted the princess,
yeah,
something like that. Yeah, it's
yeah, no,
incredible.
yeah. And
And
I do,
what that means for people too, they don't realize that means like the knowledge that came to Egyptian, it was coming from North Syria as well, and it affected the new emergence of splendor and everything in the later 18th dynasty,
yeah,
right? And then some people, which I want to get into, Gary, and I'm really interested in, and everybody's going to be interested to hear this because we talked about it years back, but many people like Lawrence Gardner, they believe that monotheism came from this as
yep,
well, and
yep,
that
I do.
Moses was
Yep,
Akhenaten.
yeah.
So let's
And
describe that angle and where you fit in with that and your angle with that.
well, I cover that off in detail in book one, just so that everybody, if they want to get how the polytheists get there and how they make their case for it. So now understand they're using a different chronology than biblical or secular chronology, or Gardner is, to overlay Akhenaten with Moses. Um, so, but how they get there is that Moses is brought up in the royal family, and in their belief system, he's probably not even Israelite. He's just the daughter of, or the son of a pharaoh, and he's brought up and he's educated at Heliopolis. So he's going to become a great adept of the mysteries before he's even an adult. I mean, he's going to be very highly educated, and that in their belief system, he brings um, the religion of Egypt to the land of to the Israelites, and that's what they bring into the land of the covenant, not monotheism. Their case is that when the monarchy comes along with Saul and then King David, is that they create a mythos and alter the religion to improve the mythos of the new monarchy being set up. And so now you're going to have Miriam, that's going to be uh, have a sister that's going to be Nefertiti, I think it might be in Gardner's chronology. They've got Aaron as another individual that's Akhenaten's brother. That Akhenaten was, wasn't worshiping Amun, he's worshiping Aten in a singular sort of fashion as the head of the pantheon. It's not monotheism, because in all of, whether it's a moon at the top and he's being worshipped, you still have the lower pantheon there. And but Aten's a sun god as well, right? As he's understood. And that
Yeah, and
religion
he's
is what,
worshiping the rays of light from the sun too.
yeah.
That's
Eh,
many rays.
So that's how they get there. And it's a very smart attack if what you're trying to do is hit all three monotheist religions in preparation to bring them into the original pantheon. You hit Moses, because Moses is the one who gets the Torah and is the great prophet of the Jewish and Israelite people. Obviously, Christianity is a branch out of Judaism, and Islam also connects themselves back to Moses as their most holiest prophet as well. Yeah, and so, I know some people might say Muhammad, but in terms of the ancient prophets, and so if you were to say that was polytheist at the beginning, you would sort of cut that right off. That all monotheism needs to be reinterpreted from the original polytheist pantheon. Is how they would go sort of about doing that. So Yeah, it's important to understand that history because as we get into the end time and the rise of the universal religion, that's going to be part of how they convert the monotheist religions into polytheism in and will be quite successful. Now they're going to have to also de-deify Jesus, but understand we have polytheist portions within all of those three sects today and have been with us for a very long time. You have Sufism in Islam, which has had a very big, significant sort of philosophical love of Sophia effect on Islam. You have the Essenes, which take their religion back to the Therapeutate and Moses within Judaism. You have the Babylonian religion coming back with the Southern Kingdom with the Kabbalah and mysticism, Sabians as well, that has been working to create like the Talmud and all of the mystical writings within polytheist Judaism that has affected Judaism. And then we have the Gnostic Christians in Christianity that work actively to reinterpret the Bible with an allegorical interpretation um, versus the literal interpretation, and understand that in polytheism, everything you have to understand the mysteries and be educated to understand the allegories to understand the true meaning. So they
Yeah.
apply that to the Bible, and that's
Let
one of
me
the major wedges between monotheism and polytheism is how you interpret the scripture and who you are, and are you an adept qualified to understand it properly.
Yeah. Before we get back into the Mittani side and some of their customs that emerged, because I wanted to get into how that leads to even the clown faces and pale faces. But uh, the way too, I don't think that it fits with Moses and Akhenaten is, I mean, from what I understand, Moses spent 40 years with Jethro, who was a Midian priest, right? A Midian high priest. So how does that
Yes,
fit in with Akhenaten?
it does not from a chronology basis. So you're just selectively taking
Yeah.
pieces out and then sort of revisionist history or rewriting it to fit your narrative. And but that's not unusual. That comes from the left and from uh, particularly those in the West in
Yeah.
terms of the polytheists. They like to rewrite history all the time and reinterpret things. So, but they make a very good case. So unless you know the different sort of histories, like how do you make that work in terms of the timing? And it just doesn't fit.
Yeah. And how best to build alliances between these bloodlines is you share new knowledge that you've attained through your power and
Yeah,
dominance.
yeah.
We give you some knowledge and we share some knowledge, and now we can go and dominate some more.
Yeah. And it's when you do a peace treaty and an alliance that wives are generally exchanged as well. So that would by inference say there was a lot of alliances going on between Egypt and the Euphrates, Eastern Euphrates dynasties that were probably saying, "Hey, we're going to be in this zone, and you're going to be in that zone, right?" And so I think there was a lot sort of going on there, and a
Before
classic
before they
for
made the alliances with the Mittani, the Egyptians, they were at war for a long.
yeah, yeah, until they got to that point where they made that alliance and treaty and
Yeah.
said, let's, right? So you get a similar one a little bit further downstream in that when David is doing battles with the Horim, and they're also called Syrians, and if you don't know that they're in different pockets, that wouldn't sort of make any sense. And again, I show how we know that the Syrians in this case are Horim in their connections to these various dynasties that we're talking about, and that the original dukes of Seir in Genesis 36, they were alternating their capitals between Syria and the Seir area and those cities that are named. And so you just have to sort of put the pieces together. But for Christians that might be listening out there, you see this understanding of this intermarriage and wives and alliances and peace treaties when David is doing wars with the Syrians. And he's not doing war, though, with the Geshurim. or the Makkathim, because again, they're a part of a different alliance there again, and that the treaty that is made with the king of Geshur, an interesting name, Talmai, and if that name sounds familiar, that's a patronymic title of a king that is also shows up earlier, like 400 and some years later or before, in the time of the conquest, as one of the three kings of Hebron or Kiriath Arba, Sheshai, which is very much associated, and Talmai and Ahiman, with the Sheshai and Talmai being also associated with the Hyksos original kings in Egypt, again showing that sort of connection of the two different pockets. And that down the road, 500 years or so, you have this king named Talmai, who has a daughter named Makkah, because they're also allied with the Makkathim in that Bashan area. And has a daughter named Makkah, but it's a matriarchal name. I'm sorry, not a wife. I'm sorry if I confuse people with that. And that is going to be his daughter Makkah, who David is going to marry because he makes a treaty with them. And he bears a son named Absalom, who's a hybrid giant. And it's Absalom who is going to work with King Talmai to start a civil war in Israel to overthrow David and put a hybrid giant on the throne. And I mean, the intrigue is crazy. And once
Well,
you start to understand the details,
it's
but
incredible.
what a play to put a dragon messiah bloodline on the Israelite throne.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. Wait, so the Matani, they also well, the Hyksos too. I found that they're in connections with the Thracians and the Hyksos as well. A lot of the
Well, they certainly
writings
look,
and
yeah, they look similar, right? And
yeah.
and the Hyksos is, an interesting, very interesting sort of group of people. And they were understood as the Shammau of the North, or the Mentu of the North, as the Egyptians would call them, and they were part of the greater Hyksos versus the lesser Hyksos. And
Wow.
they also intermixed with the Mittani, and they were also allies with the Mittani. And the Hyksos, they actually inherit the Kassite and
The
Mittani.
Hittites. The
Yeah.
Hittites, right? The Hittites too.
Well, the Hittites intermarry and are part of that whole alliance as well,
Yeah.
although you have pockets over there and into the covenant land, but they're mostly in Asia Minor. But there's other groups of people in there that they're also sort of intermixing with. And so the Hyksos, they inherit their super weapons of war, the horsemanship understanding, doing war from on horses, the chariot, the iron chariot, which they gives them the super weapon to, so which would easily have them take over in the north, that when they launched from Avaris of the Shamal city that's in Egypt, and it's where the Hyksos made their palace after taking over, the Egyptians surrendered. They didn't even fight because they didn't have that technology yet of that iron weaponry and the iron that was put into the chariots. They were so far advanced. So they inherited that from the Kassites and the Mittani as that comes downstream of the weapons of war from those invading Indo-Aryans down from the north in the mountains.
Yeah, and these Matani seem to be dressing flamboyantly,
Yep,
wearing sometimes like three ponytails with their head shaved, with their face painted white, with red
yeah,
war paint over it and different war paint over it. They even
yep,
had a style called Nutsi and Nutsi wares where they would put like sacred like geometrical shapes in white
yep,
over dark
yep.
and things like that. And
So,
they imagine and them being maybe some of them being 7, 8 feet tall or more
oh yeah,
sometimes. Big
and with
guys.
you,
Imagine them
and
on chariots dressed like
yep,
freaking clowns,
yeah, they were
demonic
taller.
warriors.
They were taller than that. They were like Orontes from that whole area, and part of the same groups of people was 12 feet tall, and that's who the
Wow.
river is made. Uh, so they were part of the pure bloodline, and Hyksos, like the Mittani, also worshipped Indra, the dragon slayer, who rode the chariot in the heavens, that chariot technology, chariots of
Yeah.
war,
Yeah.
um, and that when we look at the Hyksos, who also have elongated skulls and black beards and black hair, they're a different variety than the red-haired ones and the blonde-haired ones. Um, but very much akin to what you see with the Thracians and very much akin to the southern Greek giants, like where the Philistines came from with the Cherithim and the dark-haired ones, and very much similar to the Euphrates alliance that were dark-haired giants. Um, we have this, uh, I would say, overlapping of this costume ing, to put it in a way, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but just a uh, describing of dressing up in ways that are just bizarre. So the Hyksos and the Mittani are both known
Yeah.
for this.
Well, those clown
Um,
pants are very India-like,
yeah.
you
And
know?
if you go into Southeast Asia and you start, like Googling like giants of Bali or whatever, and you see these giant statues of these ancient demigods, they have this very pale face and all these decorative and distorted kind of faces. And it's also very much akin to the Chinese theater masks. Um, and if you've not seen those, you just have to Google them.
Yeah, for sure.
And what those theater masks in part are trying to do, it's kind of interconnected because you have those theater masks that are in Greek theater. They're just blank, right? Or other masks. What they're trying to do is in the theater is they're trying to channel the character to become the character. So they wear these masks of who that character may have been, or a symbol that this isn't, don't forget who is the actor. It's the historical character. And those historical characters were always giants, right? So they're trying to channel the demon giants. And so, but what's interesting though is the depiction of these southeastern giants, which is so different than what we get for sort of depictions of giants in Greece or in the Covenant land for the most part. And I don't know what exactly is going on there unless they are being possessed by demons that are, they're inviting them in to give them more power. I don't know. Maybe that's what they're trying to do. Or maybe they're just trying to emulate what some of the antediluvian giants and the immortal ones started to look like as their bodies were decaying, and they're doing whatever they could to keep those bodies alive. That makes a difference. And then they had to actually paint their faces because of whatever distortions. I don't know,
Wow.
but they're channeling that look,
Yeah,
and
for
we see
sure.
that, coming down through history.
It
Anything
seems to
that
be
has that,
in the human psyche too.
yeah,
That kind of demonic, people that have evil in them, sometimes even if they go through ayahuasca experiences or DMT experiences, those type of entities will appear in the psyche to haunt you and taunt you even.
yeah, and that this blank face, I mean, it's part of the shaman tradition, this white face, and they're channeling all the
Yeah.
time, right? So it seems to be part of that. When you see the court gesture in the European courts, you're wondering what the heck is this jester doing in a royal court? This is this is a polytheist priest or priestess
Yeah, and
that
they
is
always
going.
make them have enlarged body parts as well, like big, huge
Yeah,
feet. They're too big for
yeah,
the car,
yeah, and
things like
and
that.
and they're there because the royale isn't worshiping the God of the Bible. It's worshiping one of their celestial mafia godfathers, right? Or a group of them.
Love that. You got to get the t-shirt. The
Got to get the
Celestial
t-shirt.
Mafia
Yeah.
Godfathers.
And so they were there as an advisor. And so the tradition is that they're there to make the uh the kings laugh, but they're there to give sage advice. Now, You also get a tradition in the court gesture where if the advice that they're giving doesn't pan out, the royals can get quite upset. And what they did was they would take this very painted face that's set up as this sort of clown as a gesture in the court. They would take a knife or a sword and they would slit them from ear to ear and give them this big
Wow,
permanent
yeah.
smile. So now when you see the Joker in Batman, which is these are all based on Nephilim characters, that's the character there is displaying that gesture aspect of what happened with the Royales. But it's also very similar to the clown and the crazy clown that was, very popular on in the internet a number of years ago. And it's all rooted in the trickster spirits of gods and demigods.
What is it?
And the,
Pennywise?
yeah, that's one of them.
Pennywise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we look at these clowns, they're called sacred clowns in the tradition, and they have a sacred sort of knowledge as well, but they're disguised as, clowns, jokers, fools. Um, but these are depicting and channeling because you have to remember these will be adepts. And in the occult, they believe they can control the demons through names or rituals. And the shamans are inviting these demons in to give them more wisdom and power, and they believe they can control them, whether or not they can. And it's also that sort of similar look that when you see a demon possessing a body and it's not symbiotic, like you get these distortions in the face and these pale looks and all these other things that hurt the host, which is very, very similar again to how the clowns are being dressed up and those ancient pictures of giants. And I would also say that, mimes are part of that same thing,
Yeah.
just a different branch of what they're communicating with some of their
That knife slash
information.
smile is haunting me right now. That is incredible.
Yeah, that's crazy stuff. So
The imagery in my head from that is like that's where it comes from. I'm 100%.
yeah,
My body responded to it like,
yeah,
oh my God,
yeah,
that is
yeah.
true.
So why are clowns one of the more popular, or used to be one of the more popular outfits on Samhain? Day of
Yep,
the Dead is
for sure.
celebrated with those in a
It's
lot of
so true.
cultures with white faces. And these are demon spirits coming through, which is part of the whole Samhain or Halloween 2 week festival. And so it just sort of fits sort of perfectly in there.
And a
And
lot of times, for ritualistic work, the idea of painting your body white so you could put sigils on top
yeah,
of it, you
yeah.
know?
So the magicians were understood in medieval times as sacred clowns. And that's the allegory that's sort of being expressed on that.
And we had a lot of different shape shifting shamanistic cults, for lack of a better word, that emerged from these cultures as well. One of them was the Nuroi, and one of the Nuroi were sort of like wolf shape shifting shamanistic
Yep,
tribe. I think
yep,
they're Slavic in nature, I guess you could say. They would paint themselves white,
yep,
and do shape shifting rites, which is very similar to what
yeah,
we're speaking about here. And you're
yep,
channeling these disembodied spirits of these Nephilim type beings who would dress like these during their lives,
yep,
raiding and
yep,
conquering as giants, dressed like
yep,
these
yep,
flamboyant warriors on
yep,
chariots. It's like
yep,
Mad Max in the desert with giant clowns.
yeah. And i- we have to understand that whether or not it's a dark-haired giant, a red-haired giant, blonde-haired giant, whatever kind of giant, they had not just white skin. These were ghostly Casper white skin. It was distinctly different than the white, than what people would typically sort of imagine it. So now, if you're living to long ages, and let's say you're doing a lot of battles, but you're not dying, you might take a lot of facial wounds. Now, how are you
Yeah.
going to cover that up?
It's also white like a star, like
Yeah,
the
so
stars.
you're going to do things to cover up on your face. So now you're probably saying, well, let's turn that more into a decorative sort of look,
Yeah.
or however that you want to do it to cover up some of those scars as they age. Because these giants, it took a long time before, they had intermarried so much where the lifespans, came down. So the early giants after the flood, and certainly the ones before the giants, even though for all being reproduced after Genesis 6:3 to 120 years, there was this long process of these bodies that were decaying. And so you had things that come out of Greek mythology, like the golden fleece, which was the clothing for the gods, and the demigods were really searching for this so that they could put them on because it would permit the body from decaying.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
also,
and
the
and
first Aboriginals on the planet seem to have
yeah,
painted themselves white, like Australians, and
yeah, yeah, again, mimicking the look of those demigods, right?
yeah.
That they were that pale, and that particularly after the flood, that many of the giants actually committed suicide because they're in such pain from their bodies decaying.
Wow. Wow. And that idea of mummification too, it there was an ancient king Nemi from Vedic that they mummified way before any of the mummies that we know of in ancient Egypt. So it seems that that was carried down from that ancient Asura Deva tribes.
Yeah,
We've talked about, guys, a lot of different cultures, but these Mittani and the Kassites and the Elamites and the Indo-Aryan people of the ancient Middle East. I mean, there's very important because it sort of was the first ones that reemerged the knowledge after the flood, and all of the cultures that we hold, that we discuss, people don't realize it emerges from this same source, right? And we've
yep,
discussed in other shows the word Asura and Asar with Osiris, and the Assyrians. I mean, they obviously are from Asura, and like Gary said, the Mittani, they worshipped gods like Mitra, Vedic gods like Varuna and Indra, and
yep,
even the Ashwins are mentioned. And the Hittite tablets, they talk about these chariot racing uh, terms that they have, and it's
yep,
virtually in pure Sanskrit,
yeah.
you know?
So, so that I know we're starting to get close to the end of the show. So when we talk about Mithra, this is an under investigated and poorly understood God that is part of Mithraism as we understand it, which is a religion of the Roman army, of course, a warrior class, right? But it's a branch of Zoroastrianism. And Mithra is one of the main gods in Zoroastrianism, and Zoroastrianism is the Indo-Aryan religion after the flood. It is the one that they brought with them, um, or regenerated after the flood. And so when we look at that word Lord Maitreya, as I said before, that is an Indo-Aryan word for mitre or Mitra, which is the old way of spelling Mithra, because the H is part of the evolution of the language. And it means a noble, just as the giants were all nobles, the Celts are the nobles, and these are the pale, classic, red-haired noble Celts of the Tuatha Danu, the Ditanu, the Titans, and anyways, I don't want to get too far down that track, but this is meaning also of the name is a noble and an alliance and a friend of humankind, or a bond in alliance. And as you understand that Lord Maitreya is an allegory for the coming dragon Messiah that a lot of people proclaim, that would start in 2025 in the era of that, according to Alice Bailey, as we covered off on one
Yeah.
of the shows. That word mitre could also mean this big, huge hat that the Pope and bishops sometimes wear, which
Yeah.
comes out of the same imagery of the Syrians and the
Atargatis and all of
Mesopotamians.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Atargatis and all that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that word Lord Maitreya as a noble, and understand that ruler, because the giants were rulers. Yeah, I mean, that word is Indo-Aryan reg, which regal and regalis and words like that in Latin comes from. That the word raw for king in French, Old French, that becomes king in English, is connected to regal and words like that that go back to reg. Um, and so royale is, you know, AL is a transliteration of EL for an angel or a god, just as Baal means Lord God or Master God. And
How
that
about
these
the
are the
word
kings of
Aten
God.
before? How about the word Aten before? You think that comes from Adon and Adonai, or it's Adon is or Adonai is related to Aten or Aton?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, Adon in the Middle East, the D and the T are interchangeable
So there you
to
go.
pen and transliterated. So, yeah, so you could easily have Adon or Aten as being the same. And in Semitic, D was the T. So depending on which language that you're doing it. And the other one that is really interesting in terms of understanding, but that would be equivalent to also like Adonis in the pantheon of the Middle East,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So um, in the Council of the Gods in the Ugaritic texts, in the tribe of Ditanu, Ditanu, that would be Hebrew Dedan, without the U, two Ds instead of one D and a T,
Oh wow.
and is, the Tuatha Danu of Anu of the Sumerian pantheon. And that if you would now take that transliteration to Greek, you could, instead of having two D's like in the Hebrew, you could have two T's in the Greek, which would be Titan. This was the assembly of the Titans, and these would be earthly Titans and heroes of the giants. And so once you start to understand that interchange, you start to see connections in different types of people. We see that flip around on it as the Padua for the same group of people in the Mesopotamian region, where they've just got, instead of, the D in the beginning, it's a T, and then instead of a T, it's a D. It's the same group of people that is
Yeah,
all being referenced in multiple languages. So, yeah, we have to be aware of that D and the T, and particularly with Aten, because yes, and that's how the polytheists understand it as well.
yeah.
That
Wow.
Aten would be equivalent to Adonis, and Aten would also be equivalent to Baal and as an
Yeah.
offspring god, right? So,
Yeah. And Indra. Well, it's Susan Donahue in the chat room, Gary. She's a longtime supporter of ours and my work as well. And she always has interesting things to add. She said she had something interesting to say. It's sort of a question as well. The Royal Orders of Jesters or Shriners is all about mirth. Is this a thinly veiled Mithra worship?
yep,
Very interesting.
yep. And done with an Egyptian flavor, which is also kind of unique.
Yeah, very interesting. Yep. And the Kassites, they also had like all sorts of Vedic terms and things
Yep.
like that too as well. I forget the one of them that I was gonna say. It slipped my mind, but all of them
So,
as well, the
well,
Hittites and the Persians, they all had the
yeah,
winged disc as well.
yeah,
All
yeah.
that.
And it's so important to understand that Indo-Aryan is the language of the giants. Sanskrit is Indo-Aryan. And, when you get into, as you and I have talked about, when you get into like the horn god, that is a standard in polytheism. And that is the Indo-Aryan word Cern or Kern, and could be pronounced transliterated as Cern or Kern. And then you've got Cern in the Etruscan pantheon. And you
Yeah.
have Odin as an offspring god, as this horn god, Cernunnos. You have a whole tradition that's all coming from the same Indo-Aryan root. And these are all rulers, just as Meg is the uh, Indo-Aryan word for Megastranes and Mega all
Wow.
describing giants. And those are
Yeah.
the words used in the New Testament to
Wow.
describe the kings and the mighty ones in the book of Revelation.
Wow. And I think it's important too, we can wrap this up with this, is that since at least 3000 BC, like we started off the show with, our society till this very day has been dominated by that Asura forces. And these Asura forces, to translate it from the non-Vedic term, is what is stopping human potential from raising its highest uh, uh, achievements. Spiritually and physically, our potential is being stifled by the Asura current or the Asura vibe, which is about domination, control, keeping us drug addicted, keeping us stupid, keeping us uninformed, keeping us talking about fake news, keeping us just broadcasting materialistic things that we want, worshiping materialistic people. All of that is the Asura and Egyptian culture, Assyrians, Hittites, Mittani. That was all about materialistic Asura culture. And this is what is dominating the forces of today. And it's very important for us to learn this and point it out so we could be aware of we're battling and what we're up against.
Right. And we see that in the policies today. These are the same forces that are perpetual war and that they want a global government and a global religion, and they're prepared to do whatever it takes to get there. And there's rivals for this, just as there's been all the way through, and they're going to continue to do that. So that's why I warn people, if they have a globalist policy or a perpetual war policy, you need to dig into these people because they are not looking after our better interest.
That's for sure, everybody. Guys, if you don't support Gary Wayne, do it now. Please like and subscribe for the algorithm. We're sponsored by the mysticalspiralstore.com, and go to genesis6conspiracy.com. Pick up both books, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. Gary Wayne is always appearing everywhere. You can contact him on social media. Is there anything you need to share, Gary?
Just let people know if they're not aware of it, is his book one is now out on Audible. So you can go to Amazon and get the Audible version, just as you can get the digital version from Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Amazon or other places to get the printed books for both books one and book two. But Audible is on Amazon Audible and iTunes. And I know the Audible market is just growing in leaps and bounds. And book two, all things being equal, will be out before Christmas. We're just had a bit of a setback with the health of the narrator, but we're still projecting to get that out before Christmas as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. This is episode 32 of the Space Water Podcast, Nephilim